been as good, if not better. A public utility is a public utility and belongs in public ownership. I think we should vote for it and substitute the minority for the majority.
Yes.
Jay Formick, City Club member. I urge City Club to vote no for substitution. The minority has supported its assertion that creating a PUD will stabilize rates with nothing. There is no evidence that the minority has presented to convince us that there will in fact be positive consequences with the creation of a Multnomah PUD. Accountability was an issue from the minority, but the minority failed to mention that under our current system, investor-owned utilities are regulated by the Oregon Public Utilities Commission. So there is a public oversight body that does implement that function. I recommend a no vote on the minority's motion.
Thank you, Jay.
Ron Cease, member of the City Club. Is it appropriate to ask an informational question?
I think so. Yes.
In the majority report, and I think it affects, we're talking about the minority report now, but I think it affects both minority and majority report, and that is the majority has a second recommendation, and that is for a committee to study the whole question of public power. What is the force of that?
Well, I can answer that one, I guess. All recommendations or requests for study are forwarded to the club's research board. And every year we sort of have to look at our capacity in terms of how many studies we need to, we can accommodate, as well as what are the kind of the burning issues of the day. So we would take this recommendation as one of probably several recommendations that will come to the research board over this next year. And people can participate in the research board process and help us prioritize. And if this is very important to the membership, help us understand that priority.
Well, the reason I ask is clearly the majority hedges its bet on talking about not approving the two measures. And it seems to me that does have an impact on some people can vote in reference to the larger question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Heather.
Heather Kometz, City Club member. I would recommend to the club that they not substitute the minority for the majority, primarily because we're not given equal choices with these measures. If you look geographically, it's not do we have a PUD or do we have PGE. It's a Swiss cheese result. Everybody can opt out, so we don't get a clear-cut answer of we're all in this together in public power or we're not. Basically, people can opt out of the public power by not voting it through, and I think that that would provide for a more expensive option rather than the equally held public power option that I think a lot of people are desiring, but is not offered in these measures.
Thank you.
My name is Ken Lewis. I'm a City Club member. Like Ron Cease, I'd like to ask a question.
Try. Go ahead.
Could the proponents and opponents tell us what successful or unsuccessful PUDs have occurred in the state of Oregon?
Well, let's make that a brief response from each of the two sides because we've got a lot ahead of us. And it might be, there's probably a lot of information behind any response there. So I don't know whether Pete and Ed would be willing to give us just a brief comment or two on that.
My position before the microphone doesn't necessarily reflect my position. In the report, it lists some PUDs that have been successful, that are operating. The Tillamook PUD, it's on page 9 of the report. If you look at it, I'm not sure it's necessary for me to repeat all these. They're already there. It lists the rates from the most expensive to the least expensive. Most, to our knowledge, and I'll certainly allow Pete to respond to this too if he wishes, to our knowledge, none of the successful PUDs in Oregon is a metropolitan PUD. They're all rural PUDs, which to our way of thinking made a big difference.
Pete, would you like to add anything to that?
that summed it up pretty well. The only thing that I'd add is that for us, the decision was not about the rates, because there were some PUDs that had higher rates and some PUDs that had lower rates. And in the minority's opinion, it was not that really didn't fall into it. And that's why we showed the chart in the report that PGE and Pacific Power fell somewhere in the middle. Across the country, if you look at the APPA website, the American Public Power Association, rates are generally lower for all across the board, residential, industrial, and commercial power. But in Oregon, it's a mixed bag. So you can make your own decision about that. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. Tom?
Just a little bit of balance here from Tom Dunn, City Club member. The balance would be, I could ask the question, well, how do private power companies stack up what's their record? I can answer that question with respect to PGE. It's not good. I live in a part of town where we regularly use power supply due to the activities of squirrels. It's a very fragile transmission system. It always has been, and there's no reason to believe it's going to get better. We have an executive group in PGE who makes salaries that are upwards of 20 times the lineman's salary. I'd rather have more of the money going to the people who actually keep the power going than to these executives who I have no idea what they do in a monopoly situation.
Do we have further comments either for or against substituting the minority recommendations? If not, we'll now vote on substituting the minority report, which recommends a yes vote on both measures, for the majority report, which of course recommends a no vote on both measures. The vote requires a simple majority for approval. So all those in favor of substituting the minority report, please raise your voting cards. Okay. I think we may need a count here. So Wendy and other staff are going to count if you'll hold up your cards. Keep those arms up. You ready? Pardon? Well, let's see what the other vote against. So those all voting, all those opposed to substituting the minority report, raise your cards. Okay, I think that's clearly the majority opinion in this case. We don't need. I think we probably don't need to count those with their cards up. So the City Club membership has voted to reject the substitution of the minority report for the majority report. We'll now vote on whether to adopt the report with the majority recommendations. Again, in this vote, you're voting to approve the majority recommendations. A yes vote means to approve the report with those recommendations, which are, of course, to vote against the two ballot measures. Is there any further debate on this measure, on discussion here? No? Okay. Ray.
I think I'll vote against the majority recommendation because it seems to me that we keep studying and studying and studying and studying to the point where it dies.
Well, where Ray goes, I follow. Jay Formick, City Club member. I am a very unhappy customer of a publicly owned utility district in Clackamas County. Much has been made of the virtues of public power in this debate and outside of this room as well. I can tell you that the customer service, people in the city of Canby, which is a small urban publicly owned utility, the customer service there is simply awful. Public power does not deliver customer service to the same level or standards as Portland General Electric does. The club should also know that the election of a PUD will eliminate many of the provisions of Senate Bill 1149, which provides for options to purchase green power, as well as providing funding for weatherization for low-income households and funding for bill payment assistance. There's no guarantee that a Multnomah PUD would replicate that. In fact, the debt service that a Multnomah PUD will have to sustain will probably guarantee that they will not be able to provide that kind of programming because it just simply wouldn't fit in the budget. I recommend that we vote in favor of this position.
Thank you, Jay. Any other comments? Thanks.
Megan Steele, City Club member. Very briefly, I recommend that we vote in favor of the majority recommendation because I believe that public power is a promising prospect for Portland. I simply don't believe that Measure 2651 and 2652 are the best approach at this time, but if you do consider it promising, let's support efforts to look at it more carefully.
Thank you. Any further comments? I want to add one more piece of process before we take the vote. Our club advocacy guidelines say that if a vote is adopted by at least 80% of the participants in a vote, then we can proceed on to advocacy of that position. And that's just 80% is a, albeit somewhat arbitrary threshold, but it indicates that there's really substantial support by the club for a particular position. So on this next vote, I'll ask people to hold their cards up long enough that we can try and take account and see if we're at the 80% level or not. And only if there's a clear supermajority and at about 80% will we participate in advocacy in such things as writing editorials, participating in hearings, etc. So I'll restate that, what we're going to do. It's now to vote on whether to adopt the report with the majority recommendations, which are to vote no on both of the ballot measures. If you are in favor of adopting the report with majority recommendations, raise your voting cards and please hold them up for a few minutes. Clearly, we should have used the automatic voting machines here at your table, so it would have made it easier, but next year. Right. Well, let us know how many, hold that number and let's take the no votes. Let's see all those in favor of rejecting the study recommendations. Okay. Okay. Well, clearly the vote in favor of the recommendations of the study committee are in the majority, but Wendy, are they in a 80%? We did not attain an 80% number. We'll get the exact numbers here in a few minutes and let you know those, but not an 80%, but we did have a majority recommending adoption of the committee's recommendations. Thank you, all of you, for participating in this activity, and thank you especially to the study committee for their great work on this report. We're almost ready to move on to the next part of our program. However, before I introduce Duncan Wyse and Joann Waller, I have a few additional items of club business. Next Friday, October 17th, please join us for the David M. Lawrence, MD Lecture, co-sponsored with the Foundation for Medical Excellence. Our speaker will be the former Governor John Kitzhaber, who will speak on reframing the national healthcare debate, challenging our basic assumptions. The Healthcare Issue Committee has prepared a background report on the gaps in healthcare access for this forum, so look for it in your bulletin. I think there may be copies of it on the back table there. It'll be coming to you in your mail. Reserve your place today for the October 17th forum online or through City Club staff. As you know, the City Club Annual Fund Campaign is well underway. The goal for this year is $115,000. This is a pretty exciting time at City Club, and your contributions help sponsor events such as today's vote, as well as things like the Keeping Oregon's Promise series and citizen research of the type that we do throughout the year. You can make your contributions by check or by credit card or as an automatic monthly withdrawal. Contribution envelopes are available in the back of the room. On Monday, October 27th, join Mayor Vera Katz, ex-Commissioner Gretchen Kafuri, and others who blaze the trail as City Club celebrates 30 years of Women in City Club. This event will take place from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at a location to be announced, and please RSVP to the club in the next couple of days, or next few days, please. On Saturday, November 1st, City Club's new Leaders Council will join with the Blue Monk Restaurant and Jazz Club and the original Jazz Cats Jazz Blues Band to celebrate the work of new leaders in City Club. This fundraising event is open to the public, with half of all the admission proceeds going to the club. Doors open at 7:30, and the original Cats will perform from 8 till midnight. Join us then to support new leaders, hear great music, and have an amazing, great time. For more details, contact Nikki at the club, or you can also RSVP online. Finally, on to the program. Today's program gives us a chance to look at how Oregonians' fundamental beliefs and values have changed and haven't changed over the last decade. The Oregon Beliefs and Values Survey was first conducted in 1992, when it gave us the first comprehensive profile of Oregonians' priorities, key concerns, and beliefs. A decade later, a coalition of business and labor union leaders went back to the original questions and also some new questions, and posed those again to Oregonians. Duncan Wyse and Joann Waller are here to tell us what the two surveys tell us about for the evolution of Oregonians' beliefs. Joann Waller has been the executive director of the Oregon Education Association since 1997. She grew up in Missouri in the small town of St. Genevieve, and after earning her Master's of Arts degree in English from Southeast Missouri State University, she was a high school English teacher for 9 years in Crystal City, Missouri. She became the assistant executive director of the Florida Education Association, and then was executive director of the Oklahoma Education Association for 8 years. As executive director of the Oregon Education Association, Joann Waller has helped establish the Center for Teaching and Learning, and has achieved several political victories in the area of initiative reform and protection of members' rights. One of the areas that has expanded the most in the several years under her leadership has been OEA's participation and leadership in coalition building with the business community, other unions, and human services groups around the state. Duncan Wyse became the president of the Oregon Business Council in June 1995. The OBC is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization consisting of 44 business executives of some of Oregon's largest businesses. OBC's function is to focus on long-term issues of public policy facing Oregon. Prior to this position, Duncan was executive director of the Oregon Progress Board, where he developed Oregon Shines, Oregon's long-term strategy for economic growth, and Oregon Benchmarks, indicators measuring how Oregon is doing as a people, place, and economy. Previously, he spent 8 years at the California Public Utilities Commission, serving as advisor to the president and director for policy and planning. He was heavily involved in the restructuring of telecommunications, electricity, and natural gas industries in California. Currently, he serves on multiple boards, including the Oregon Quality Education Commission, the E3 Employees for Education Excellence Board of Directors, the Portland Multnomah Progress Board, the Multnomah County Commission on Children, Families, and the Community, and the Portland Public Schools Foundation. He holds a bachelor's degree from Pomona College and a master's in business administration from Stanford University. Welcome. I think Joann will be going first. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. What do Oregonians value and believe? When the study was first done in 1992, the goal was simple: to get an in-depth picture of what Oregonians thought, valued, and believed. 10 years later, we wanted to take another look, a look at what had changed and what things had remained the same. Thus, the Oregon Values and Beliefs 2002. Our organizations, the Oregon Business Council, the Oregon Education Association, the Oregon School Boards Association, and Service Employees International Union Local 503, Oregon Public Employees Union, came together to do the study. Now, while we may seem like an unlikely group, we had worked together on some issues in the 2000 election in a coalition called Our Oregon. we found that we could work together and that we had a common interest, the well-being of Oregon and Oregon citizens. So we decided to work on this project. We decided to try it again and see how we would do with this one. So Duncan and I are going to show you some of the results of the survey today, and, as you know, give you a chance to see how you match up with your fellow citizens. So I'm going to turn it over to Duncan to begin. Duncan.
Thank you, Joann, and I want to thank the City Club for inviting us today. You are the first recipients of this information since it was released publicly yesterday, and I think it's quite appropriate given the history you have in doing great research on public policy issues. I hope you find this a great resource for you as you go forward. We are going to share a lot of data today on the slide presentation, and those on the radio are going to have a hard time seeing it directly. Although, if you're very savvy with the internet, on the radio you can go to www.oregonvalues.org and the whole slide presentation will be available there. So you could watch as you listen on a multimedia approach. But we will also try to describe these slides in detail enough so you can hear on the radio as well. 10 years ago, the Oregon Business Council did conduct the first values and beliefs study, this in-depth survey of Oregon opinion. The OBC commissioned that survey for two reasons. First, the directors wanted to understand where Oregonians were so that they could best channel their own energy into serving the community and solving problems. Frankly, it's a lot easier to get things done if the community is behind you than if you're sailing against the community. And they wanted to understand where the community was going. The second reason is to give all of us an understanding of Oregonians' views so we could calibrate it to our own work. And again, I would stress that's an important contribution this survey will make to you and other organizations around the state. I would stress at the outset that this was not done to ratify any particular position by any of us. This was an attempt to understand the views of Oregonians, and I think that's the important characteristic of this survey. The answers certainly did help us back in '92 to guide OBC's work. At the time, for example, school quality was a top concern, and for OBC that helped us decide to put a real commitment on improving quality education that lives and has gone on to this day. The survey also predicted at the time other policy issues that came quickly to the forefront. For example, we learned that Oregonians were deeply concerned about public safety at the time. Within 2 years, they had passed ballot measure 11, the sentencing guideline legislation. So a decade later, we've come back to Oregonians with a different group of folks working on this to ask the same questions and also some new ones. And I'd like to thank the partners who joined us with this. Joann Waller with the Oregon Education Association, Chris Dudley, who's here from the School Board Association, Rich Pepper from Public Employees Union, who I don't believe is here today. Been a great partnership. We've refined the survey and I think have something to contribute to the state going forward. We also involved Tom Imeson and Bill Wyatt in helping design this, and our survey firm, Patricia McKegg and Adam Davis, did a great job in pulling all this together. So with that in mind, I'd like to begin and give you first a quick overview of what the survey is about. I'm not going to get into any detail on the methodology, except to say it was conducted between November 2002 and February 2003. We used a variety of research techniques, large group surveys, questionnaires, just a variety of techniques so that we could cross-check the results we got. We involved over 2,600 Oregonians in the survey instrument, and we're able to break the data out by regions and by key socioeconomic groups to see where the differences are in the data. It's a very in-depth survey of Oregon opinion. The purpose, again, we wanted to benchmark the '92 survey to see what's changed. We wanted to monitor the changes since '92. We wanted to assess what the current views were on a variety of issues, test perceptions on emerging issues, and use that to help inform the community. So with that quick overview in mind, we're going to very briefly touch on some of the key topics. This is an incredibly elaborate survey, and we hope you'll find it something you'll want to come back to in the weeks and months ahead. But we're going to touch on 5 topics. I'm going to do the first 2, community and the economy, and then Joann will cover the last 3, education, government services, and funding public services. So we'll start with the community. And we start here because really when we listen to Oregonians, they organize themselves around communities. It's not typically around the big policy issues that we sometimes talk about. When you think about Oregonians, they start with the community. And within the community, it's family that is the most important core value Oregonians begin with. When we ask them about the community itself, they highlight the importance of natural beauty, the environmental quality, and the small town feel in their communities, and that's what they like about their communities. We asked them some specific questions about what services and features were most important. Quality education, accessible health care came out on the top. Now, those are some overarching findings on community. I'm going to just touch on some data to help illustrate some points about this. First of all, we asked a question in the survey. Overall, today, how would you rate your feelings about Oregon? This is the result Oregonians provided. 76% are very positive about Oregon. It's up actually 7 points from 10 years ago. Only about 13% have a negative view towards Oregon. We asked you earlier before lunch, or right before lunch, your views, and we're able to share your views in contrast with Oregon. Oregonians are at 76%, is that right? You are exactly at the same level as Oregonians as a whole. 76% of the City Club also have a positive view of Oregon. All right. We also asked Oregonians, another question just was, are we on the right direction or are we on the wrong track? 50% of Oregonians think we're on the wrong track, while 35% think we're on the right direction. Let's see where you are. You are a little more pessimistic. Overwhelming, and that is interesting. The more motivated you are as a voter, the more you think we're on the wrong track. Those non-voters actually tend to be more optimistic in terms of where we're heading. But you'll notice the contrast between these two questions. People are very positive about Oregon, and we'll find that people are very positive about their personal lives, but at the same time have deep concerns about the broader forces swirling around them here in Oregon. Very interesting finding as we look to this survey. I believe those core values around positive attitudes are the ones that really are the ones that have endured over the decade. So let's go into those. What are the core values? Again, I mentioned it earlier. When we do a careful technique called scaled comparisons, overwhelmingly, family comes out at the top of the list. I won't go into this methodology, but it was number one in 10 years ago, and it's number one today. It's followed in number two spot, and by a distant second, by career or job opportunity. That's up slightly from a decade ago. And charitability to others comes in at number three. But key point, family is number one on people's values when you ask Oregonians what they value most. We also ask the question, what do you value most about living in your community? And again, maybe this may not be too surprising, but about a third of Oregonians speak to the community characteristic itself. Small town feel, neighborliness, those are at the top, about 1/3. Another third, roughly, talk about the quality of the scenery, the environment, the recreational opportunities. In all, community and recreation and environment come in with 2/3. It's about the place and the communities. Interestingly, even though this was in the winter, it was about 10% cited the weather as something they really liked, just about where we were 10 years ago. And I thought that was interesting because it was done in the summer. I thought it was just people, but actually Oregonians like the weather here, at least some do. All right, so community values. We asked which of the following are most important in terms of the quality of life of where you live. And this has changed a little bit over the 10-year period. In the number one spot comes accessible hospitals and health care. Number two, up from 4 10 years ago, is a community committed to quality education. Number 3, up from 8 10 years ago, is honest, accountable civic city leaders. And public safety dropped to number 4 from number 1 10 years ago. Now, we asked the question, when you think about your community 10 years from now, do you think it will be better, about the same, or worse? And here Oregonians are evenly divided, 1/3 thinking better, 1/3 about the same, and 1/3 worse. Let's see where you are. You're a little more optimistic. About 50% of you think better, 30 about the same, and 21 worse. When we probed a little on the worst, by the way, one of the key themes that came up, by about 50% of those answering, was something about congestion and concern of overpopulation, but along with a variety of other concerns. Now, we also were interested in institutions in the community that make it a better place or perhaps a less appealing place. We didn't ask this 10 years ago, and I think the answers are pretty interesting. Again, the question is, does this institution make it a better place, no difference, or less appealing? At the top of the list here are small business, colleges and universities, nonprofits, and charities. Over 90% of Oregonians feel those institutions make their community a better place. Next in line come elementary and high schools, religious organizations, and civic organizations like the City Club. They all command pretty strong support by the community at large. The bottom half of the institutions are somewhat interesting. At the very bottom are political parties. 24% of Oregonians think political parties make Oregon a more appealing place. A larger number, 26, think it makes it a less appealing. They make Oregon a less appealing place. The federal government doesn't come in very well either. 28% think it makes it the federal government makes our community more appealing. A strong 29 less appealing. State government, again, a little bit better with 38% at making Oregon a better place to live. Joann and I noticed that about 45% of Oregonians think that labor unions and corporations make Oregon a better place to live. I suspect they're not the same Oregonians, however. All right, so that's the community. And again, think about the people, the Oregonians and their families and their communities. That's how we organize our lives. That's what we value here in Oregon. Now let's turn to a second subject, the economy. Again, we're going to go very briefly through all of this, and I'm going to hit some highlights with a little data. Oregonians, first of all, believe that there will be a greater variety of businesses and industries in the next 10 years. They're fairly optimistic on that point. They identify education, healthcare, human and social services as priorities for supporting a healthy economy. They want more jobs, and they're dissatisfied with how well we're doing, and they believe that the gap between rich and poor will grow. So let's take just a quick snapshot of some of the data. We've got a lot of rich data in this area. We asked the question, over the next 10 years, Oregon's economy will be driven by companies outside Oregon doing the creative work and making the big decisions. And how likely is that to happen? About 50% said that's likely to happen. And an even larger number, 59%, said that would be undesirable. What we asked in a separate question was, how desirable is it for Oregon companies to be doing the creative work, being leading companies in the knowledge economy? Overwhelmingly, Oregon buys that vision for what they want Oregon to become in the decade ahead. A vision, by the way, we strongly endorse in the Oregon Business Plan. We asked the question, over the next 10 years, Oregon will have more jobs. Remember, this was done in a recession when we have the highest unemployment rate in the country. 60% of Oregonians think that we will have more jobs in the next 10 years. That's up from 45% 10 years ago. So Oregonians are pretty optimistic about the prospects. And overwhelmingly, Oregonians feel that that is desirable. 78% believe that's important. We then asked a series of questions on the important conditions necessary to create a healthy economy. And this, we generated a long list of possible ideas that Oregonians could support. At the top of the list, with over 90% support, were K-12 education, making higher ed more affordable and accessible, reducing healthcare costs, expanding engineering and technical education, and increasing workforce training. If you'll notice, at the top of the list in Oregonians' mind is 4 out of the top 5 relate to education and what Oregonians believe is important for supporting a healthy economy going forward. We have a long list of items, and I'm not going to go through all. I will just point out at the bottom of the list, although they did command reasonable support, about 50%, were areas in our Oregon Business Plan we've highlighted: expanding air service, increasing timber harvest, and revamping our land use laws for industrial expansion. Those don't command the level of support, and again, we weren't necessarily asking for ratifications. We have some communications on some of these issues to do, and we understand that. But again, we have, I think, a pretty good recipe laid out in terms of what it will take to build a healthy economy. Finally, on the economy, we asked a new question this time. The gap between the rich and poor will grow wider. And again, we asked how likely is this to happen. 75% see this as a likely development over the next 10 years, and an equal number, 75%, see this as very undesirable. And I interpret with other data in this that Oregonians see the connection more strongly than ever between education and a good quality job. And that's why the focus is so heavily on jobs and training and workforce skills. I think that the trends in the economy are evident to folks, and they put a high priority on education to move the economy and job growth forward. With that, I think that's a great transition to Joann, who will now turn to education. Thanks.
You know, before I go on with education, I do want to make a point in case you didn't get it from the very beginning. You put two labor unions, the Oregon School Boards Association and the Oregon Business Council, at the table and say, okay, if you could ask Oregonians any 200 questions you wanted, what would they look like? Do you know how many months it took us to agree on what the questions were going to be? And then, much less, how we look at the answers, which of course we're all looking at them a little bit differently with our own eyes and our own glasses. I'd like to talk to you, though, about the key findings on education. Oregonians, and this is good news, I think, Oregonians identify education as one of the three most important services provided by government. They believe higher education and K-12 education are priorities for a healthy economy. They're more satisfied today with their schools than they were in 1992, and they're slightly more concerned in 2002 about funding than they are about the quality of the schools and the curriculum. How good of a job is Oregon doing? Combining good and somewhat good, providing primary and secondary education, K-12 education, 48% in 2002 versus 38% in 1992. That's a 10% increase. Certainly, that is good news whenever you look at it, but if you look down at the bottom of the page, you see a third of the citizens of Oregon believe that we do a bad job in education. Our goal here, of course, is to see if we can get those numbers changed. Is major change needed in your local neighborhood school? This is another benchmark question. In 1992, 56% of the respondents said, yes, we need major change in our neighborhood school. This year, that's dropped to 43%, again, showing that satisfaction. 36% say no, we don't need change in our local neighborhood school in 2002 versus 23% in 1992. Then we asked an open-ended question, what kind of change do you think is needed? Again, this is one of the benchmarked questions. In 1992, the respondents said 36% identified curriculum as the top issue, that there needs to be change in the curriculum. In 2002, 37% say funding is the top issue. More funding, less waste, more efficiencies, and stopping the cuts. So we can see a big change, and of course we can also see there demonstrated how the discussion has changed in 10 years. Back in 1992 is when standards-based education was being debated the most. There were all kinds of things happening around education, and of course what we've been talking about for the last 12 months or so has been the funding of education in our state in 2002 and 2003. The next graph, the question was, do we need a whole new approach in local schools, or should we just do what we're doing better? As you can see, in 1992, over on 22% or thereabouts of the respondents were saying that we needed a whole new approach. But if you look at that graph, you can see that it's pretty well evenly divided all across the page, that you have people with kind of divided opinions, certainly, but there's no one position that just jumps out on you. Look at 2002, same question. You can see there the spikes on the graph, and I think that's what's important. The number hasn't changed very much on a whole new approach. To continue to do what we're doing better spikes all the way up to a little bit over 30%, and then you see in the middle we also have a spike. What we believe that this is telling us as we've looked at it is that people are becoming more polarized in their views. You're going to see this again in another graph that we do. And as they become more polarized, those folks in the middle are the ones who are going to decide what direction Oregon is probably going to go in the future. Then the next section is are the key findings on government. what we found is that Oregon is doing a good job providing many services, including K-12 education, fire and emergency services, children's services, which they identify as the most important services that government provides, and higher education, senior services, and improving roads and highways are more important today than what they were in 1992. The next one, how good of a job is Oregon doing? Well, if you look at, I know that's very hard to read, and I'm going to tell you what the top ones say. If you just look at the difference between the green and the gold, the green is 2002, the gold is 1992. There's been very little change in how people feel about these issues. Providing parks and open spaces, cultural and entertainment opportunities, maintaining clean air and water. All of those are issues that the public believed in 1992 and continue to believe today that we do a good job of. And then the list goes on. There were 19 items that were tested here. This was I guess, Duncan, if we negotiated one list, this was a big negotiations here as to what these 19 items would be. And you can see then on the next slide, providing government services. There is a big change there. In 1992, only 32% of the respondents thought that we did a good job in providing government services. In 2002, 51% believe that we do a good job. Providing K-12 education. Again, that's the one that we showed earlier. 48% in 2002 think we're doing a good job versus 38%. But I think the thing that is important is where that ranks in this list, and notice that we're not at a 50% satisfaction rate yet on schools. The last one on that list is creating jobs. 28% think we do a good job versus 13% in 1992. Clearly, no one thinks that we're doing a very good job in that area either 10 years ago or today as well. The next one, government services. What government service is more important regardless of cost? First, in 1992 and first today, primary and secondary education ranked number 1. Fire and emergency services 2, children's services 3. Higher education is the big change. The rank for 2002 is 4 versus 9th in 1992, a big shift. And I think it shows respondents who are looking at education as something that goes beyond the K-12 system and what that could mean to our lives and the quality of our lives. The next slide shows which one service do you consider most important. This was an open-ended question. The respondents said that education by 41% is the number 1 service. This is the service you consider to be most important. Notice the drop-off to the next one. I think it's not just that it's 41% that's noteworthy, but the fact that the next closest to it is at 16%. Police, roads and highways at 6%, healthcare at 4%. So you can see how all of those things are working there. Then this is our other graph that we want to look at. The question was, some people say that government provides too many services. Others say service levels need to be increased. If you look at the graph in 1992, you can see that the big majority of people are in the middle of the graph, but they're spread pretty evenly across the middle, and even the ends, there's just an even divide on this question in 1992. If you look at the huge spikes that we see in this question in 2002, I think you see some of what we see reflected in all the debate that's going on various issues around our state currently. In 2002, reducing government services is at about 17%. Increasing government services is about at 18%. And then you see in the middle that huge spike, much like Mount Hood on the horizon, if you think of it that way, right there in the middle. The key for all of us as we think about issues, no matter which side you're on, we believe is going to be where do those people in the middle go on issues and how do they move from one spot to another. The next key findings are on funding services. 2/3 of Oregonians believe Oregon's tax system needs changing. Oregonians are divided on the kind of change the system needs. Oregonians are divided on how to stimulate the economy and fund public services. These are not big secrets, are they? Many Oregonians think that we spend about the right amount on public services, have about the right level of services, and that the level of taxation is about right. Do you believe a change is needed in Oregon's tax system at this time? 2/3 of the respondents said yes. 2/3 of the respondents said yes. Let's see what they think. Those who think change is necessary, we asked them why. It was an open-ended question. They got to identify what the issue was. Tax reduction, 21%. Reform the tax system in general, 15%. Better management of funds, 14%. More tax dollars to schools, 12%. Sales tax, 10%. Decrease property tax, 10%. Increase taxes, 6%. So you can see we have a divided Oregonians. 2/3 may think they need change, but what change is the issue. So let's see what you said on this one. All right, reduce taxes at 4%. It's just about right. Is that what that says? I can't see it from here. At 56%, and increase taxes at 40%. Was that the right one? I'm off of my little thing here. Okay. Then we went back and we asked the people who said, yes, they thought change was necessary. What kind of change? Again, open-ended. 19%. Implement a sales tax. Better management, 11%. Reform the tax system, 11%. More tax dollars to schools, 11%. Reduce taxes, 8%. Decrease property taxes, decrease income tax at 5%, and reduce government size at 6% there. So you can see the story doesn't change. You can ask the question a couple of different ways, and we keep getting similar answers. Over the next 10 years, we asked this question, over the next 10 years, Oregonians will restructure their tax system to reduce income and property taxes by adopting a sales tax. The number in 2002 is 39%. It's likely that we will adopt a sales tax. Unlikely, 49%. Is it desirable? 38% say yes, and undesirable, 47%. Again, this isn't saying who's on which side. This is simply showing us the divide on this issue. Different approaches to stimulating the economy and funding public services. We gave the people that we polled two statements. One says, increases in business and corporate taxes are necessary to provide vital public services that help stimulate the economy. That's A. B, increases in business and corporate taxes will diminish business investments, limit job creation, and ultimately reduce the amount of taxes generated to fund public services. You can see about 40% agree with A, about 46% agree with B, and the rest of the people don't know. Different approaches to stimulating the economy and funding public services. The level of public services and the cost to taxpayers. We gave them 3 statements. We spend too much on public services and taxes should be reduced. About 28% said they agreed with that one. Statement B, we spend about the right amount on public services and taxes should remain the same, about 44%. Statement C, we don't spend enough on public services and we should increase some taxes, 21% or about 21% there. Again, you can see that big group in the middle like things the way they are. Now let's see what you said. You said 4% reduce taxes, 16% keep things the same, and what is that number, 82%? All right, I for one applaud you on your good choices here. And then the last question that we're going to go over with you today is how optimistic are you about your personal future over the next 5 years? Optimistic in 1992, 67% said they were optimistic, 77% in 2002, and pessimistic 8% in 2002 versus 14% in 1992. So you can see there's optimism out there. Let's see if this group matches. Very optimistic, 47%, somewhat optimistic, 30%, so that would be the 77%. Hit them right on, neutral at 18%, somewhat pessimistic at 4%, and very pessimistic at 2%. So we remain optimistic, we remain divided, but optimistic. We love, what we found out about Oregonians is that they love Oregon, and they're very, very much interested in their future and the future of their children. And I'm going to let Duncan wrap this thing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Joann. Very briefly, as I said at the outset, we both said at the outset, this is the tip of the iceberg on the Oregon Values and Beliefs Study. We're really pleased to share this with you today. We have a brochure which you have at your table or can pick up as you leave. And again, I encourage you to go to www.oregonvalues.org for more information. We'll be building out that website in the weeks ahead. And again, for the City Club, I hope you use it as a resource to help support the great work that you're doing on behalf of Oregon. Thank you very much.
Oh, I thought that was fascinating. I'm glad we took the extra time to hear all about it. We are running a little bit behind our usual schedule. It's about 1:07. What I think I'll do is we'll continue questions till 1:15 as usual, and then folks who need to leave can leave, and those who'd like to stay and continue to ask questions can do so. I think the televised broadcast will end at the 1:15 point. As you all know, City Club members have the privilege of asking questions of our guests, and our first question today will be asked by Carol Witherall, a board member who's also been for 2 years the co-chair of the Education and Human Development Issue Committee of the City Club. So she'll ask the first question, and then others of you can please line up behind the microphones and ask your questions in 30 seconds or less when Carol's done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a lively and informative presentation. In 2002, 48% of the Oregonians you surveyed said that Oregon is doing a good job providing primary and secondary education. At the same time, 33% stated that Oregon is doing a bad job of providing primary and secondary education. That's not good enough for most folks I know. So let's jump the clock forward to the year 2012. You're in the survey business once more, and over 90% of Oregonians that you survey say that Oregon is doing a good job in providing primary and secondary education and in providing services to children. Now, in 2012, looking back over the decade just passed, what do you think we figured out and committed ourselves to that allowed us to get there?
You want it?
No,
Who
go
starts?
ahead.
I'll
You can
start,
go
but Joann obviously wants to clean up on this one. That is a wonderful question, and I will not try to give a complete answer. But the general answer, and again, this is an area we care very passionately about, is that every child in Oregon will have a personalized education program that meets his or her specific need, that is tied to very high education standards in all the major academic areas. That we'll have schools that support that the schools will be nurturing schools. In the case of high schools, that they will be smaller schools in many cases. But the key change will be the careful attention to the education of every single child against high standards.
Certainly, I agree with that. That is the standard that we're all hoping to reach. In addition to that, however, I believe that by 2012, Oregonians will recognize that that kind of a system is going to require looking at the way that we fund schools and the amount that we fund for schools and the size of our classes and everything connected with the cost of schooling is going to have to be looked at and looked at seriously, and will then make the decision to raise the taxes necessary in order to pay for that kind of a system. Am I being overly optimistic?
I'd like to just comment that the City Club has just initiated a study, a long-term research study on education funding, looking at the various ways to achieve sort of set assumed levels of education funding. So stay tuned on that issue. Ray.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. I'm looking at your brochure, and on the last page, under Future Values and Beliefs, what Oregonians think the next decade will bring. I'm intrigued by a quotation from a respondent from Portland. As the population keeps growing, the economy comes back, and people continue to move into the state, we're going to have big infrastructure problems in just dealing with day-to-day life if people don't get off the dime and start dealing with. Yet, I looked at your square there about what government services is more important regardless of cost, and I see that public transportation doesn't even make the list. This is not surprising, or it is surprising actually, in a state where we have more automobiles than people since March of 1989. I think we're schizophrenic about it. I think we need very seriously some alternative transportation if we have more automobiles than people, particularly in the urban areas.
I anticipated a possible question from Ray, and so I did look up one question we had in the survey we didn't present, which was people's attitude towards mass transit. 60% think, and we asked the question, over the next 10 years, mass transit will become more important. And I looked that up this morning, just anticipating you, and 60% said that would be desirable. So you'll be happy to hear that.
Kurt Webring, member. The most disturbing question that I saw, the response, is the gap between rich and poor increasing, 75%, basically, 3/4. And I'm wondering if there's anything else in your survey which indicates the interest of the public to respond to this in either public services or changes in the income tax or other kinds of programs that might address the rich and poor gap.
Well, I'll answer that. I mean, again, it was a perception question. People see it very strongly and are very concerned about it. And again, I think as you weave the data together, the key policy people connect with is education. Because again, and if you look at the real data, there's this huge connection between levels of education and skills and wages. And I think I would argue that is why Oregonians have even increased their priority on all levels of education going forward.
I think the other thing that we saw in the survey was where health care and access to health care ranked. While we are doing better, it certainly hasn't slipped anywhere off the radar screen in terms of how important Oregonians think it is, not just for themselves, but for everyone in the state. And I think that indicates the same sort of thing that Duncan was talking about.
Ron Cease, needless to say, I'm quite surprised at that figure in higher education. Tuition is going up. As a matter of fact, for a long time, tuition in the public schools, universities in Oregon have been among the highest in the country. Can you give us any sense of what the voters mean specifically, not the voters, but the respondents, mean specifically about the concern and the caring for higher education? Do you get any sense of what that means? Is it access or is it something else?
I think it is the access question. I believe that what they're looking at is they're looking at the job situation, the job market situation for their children when they graduate from high school, and they believe that there has to be more education after that, whether it be community college is also ranked very high on this survey, along with higher education. And I think it's that trend now that has moved the respondents over 10 years to believe that 12 years of free access to education isn't going to be enough. We're going to have to move beyond that.
But you didn't get any sense of how we would pay for it.
No.
Thank you.
No, the funding issue, again, you saw the data. Funding is, we are not united as a state around how to pay for public services.
I think what we'll do is we'll close the meeting formally at this point, but let people stay who'd like to ask some more questions. So I just want to say thanks to both of you, and thanks for a brilliant study, brilliantly conceived, and something that will be a great service to us all.
Thank you.
So the City Club is adjourned, but we will also take further questions. So, thank you.
I see what seems to be, to me, a concerning trend in that in the core values, what value is more important to you, the community values, what's most important, the statement that the other gentleman brought up about the gap growing between the rich and the poor, it seems to me that the things that are rated at the top of each of these lists in terms of what's important are those things that are important to those across social economic strata, but all of the things that will actually lift the disadvantaged and underserved individuals are actually falling at the bottom of the list. What was your further detail? Is there anything else in your detailed studies that indicates that we have concerns for others that are not served as well as we are? Or is it just primarily that we're, education and healthcare and those things are there for ourselves and everyone else?
Well, I'm not sure. This is probably a longer conversation. I'm not sure I fully understand, so we'll have to. But I mean, it's clear that there are a few public services that command widespread support, and you saw them. I mean, they're at the very, very top. And I would argue a lot of those services address issues of poverty and economic opportunity. Again, particularly education. But so I'd have to look. And again, the support on healthcare and healthcare access was also very high. So I'm not. I'd have to probably have an offline conversation about the specifics. But again, one of the beauties of this is you can probe more deeply into a variety of questions that may be of interest and really, I think, get a handle on a lot of specific questions that we haven't been able to touch on today.